This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson. Hello, this is your host, Harry Wilkinson, and welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. This is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks events going on in the world, happenings in media, happenings in entertainment, happening in politics, and we take a look at it all from a higher perspective. We take a step back, and we look at these things without letting them push our buttons, and without even letting them trigger feelings of either approval or disapproval, concepts of good or bad, and we take them as is. We take them as creations of our own, and we let them lead us to where our highest learning can take place. As I've said many times before on the show, a large impetus in doing this show is for me to find a way to do this in my own life. You know, we're trained to react to things as positive or negative, good or bad. We even talk about evil sometimes. We're trained to let outer events determine how we feel about ourselves, about the world, and by doing that, we allow those things to essentially command our day, command our life. And when we stop doing that, when we take that step back and we look at these things from a higher perspective, we take our power back, if you will, and re-engage with our for lack of a better word, authentic self or spiritual self, however you want to view that. Our connection to what I often refer to as divine mind. Again, the G word is one of those things that pushes those triggers I was talking about for many people, either positive or negative. So I try to stay away from terms which people may have pre-existing ideas about, whether those are feelings of positive reinforcement or whether they're feelings of negativity. So, and the G word is one of those words, but I still do use it occasionally, and so if it offends anyone, I apologize. But you may hear me use that word from time to time. In any case, that's what it's all about. It's looking at this world from that perspective and taking your power back by realizing who and what you really are and what you're really connected to. All right, enough said. So today, I want to talk about a couple of things we're going to be talking about. We'll do more on the guided imagery kinds of things, and we started talking about that last week and the week before, so I want to continue in that vein, so we'll get to that today. And we're also going to talk about, we're going to follow up on my piece on neurology and how it's being used. We talked about the Neurolaw Institute a few weeks back on this show about how neurology is being used to help create a new standard in law practice on how we deal with aberrant behavior, criminal behavior, and what it all means. And it's about moving away from concepts of moral blame and understanding that these many of these behaviors are rooted in neurological damage or disease, interestingly enough. Well, we're going to look at something a little lighter. We're going to look at how neurology is being used in the movies to create ads for movies and to create movies themselves. So that should be an interesting topic of discussion. But today we're going to start with what's been probably the biggest headline for the past few weeks. And that has to do with Syria and the bombing and or not bombing of said country to stop the use of chemical weapons. Now, just in case you're not familiar with what's been going on, it's been determined that chemical weapons were used in the civil war in Syria to attack particularly one village. And there's been some very disturbing footage on YouTube about the effects of these neurological toxins, these chemical weapons, if you will, and the damage that they've done to children and innocent women and men. It's further been determined that in this civil war, the most likely group that used these weapons is the current Syrian government, headed by a man named Assad, whom I'm sure you've heard quite a bit about. He is a dictator, some call him a despot, who is trying to hold on to power against a rising tide of rebellion. And in dealing with this rebellion, he's felt the need to kill and attack. And one of these attacks apparently involves chemical weapons. Now, when this all first came to light, he, of course, claimed that he wasn't the one who used the chemical weapons. That it was actually the rebels that used the chemical weapons. Not too many people believed that, but there wasn't credible evidence at the time to suggest who used it. So folks stayed neutral, particularly in our government. Well, but over time, as the reality of what has happened in Syria began to sink in, it was determined that since chemical weapons are against international law, that something needed to be done to make sure that those chemical weapons were never used again, and to stop any further use of it, and also not encourage its use in other countries or other areas. Now, as you may or may not know, chemical weapons were used without restraint during World War I, and the world reacted in horror when they realized the long-term effects of what chemical weapons can do. Chemical weapons are different from other weapons, and believe me, I'm not here trying to defend the use of any weapons, but I think it's important to understand why the world came together after World War I and said, we need to never use these again. I mean, even the so-called bad guys, the Germans, the Axis powers said, yeah, no, we don't want to do this anymore. Because they saw the devastating long-term effects of these things. Now, why are chemical weapons different? Well, here's why. You know, if you're bombed, you may, horrifyingly enough, lose a limb. If you survive, you may be crippled or maimed, or you may come out unscathed, or people may lose their lives. Same with bullets. Bullets tend to either kill or at least maim. But with chemical weapons, the effects are long-term and to a great degree not completely understandable. In other words, there can be effects down the road with the use of these weapons that nobody knows about or no one's prepared for. So victims of these often, particularly in World War I, the ones that were used in World War I, they didn't die. They lived on, but they lived on in such pain and with such physical deterioration that it was hardly a life at all. And if you look at these videos that they've posted about the current chemical attacks, and if you just do a web search, you go back, you can use Wikipedia, you can find images and get a greater understanding of just how horrible these chemical weapons are. So I just thought I'd say that so that people understand why there is such a call for trying to stop the use of these weapons. But what's happened in this situation, in our President Obama's attempt to deal with this situation, has been remarkable. It's been a remarkable sea change in how we have been thinking about and discussing war. This is different from the lead up to any other kind of military action we've ever had. If you go back to, Iraq, of course, but you can go back to Afghanistan, if you go back to even the interventions that we did in Kosovo, and going all the way back to the Vietnam era, the lead up to these kinds of military invasions were all very similar. A case is made, it's brought to the public, it's brought to Congress in some cases, and it's decided that the only way that we can effectively stop this from happening, deter this from happening, the only way that we can stop attack is with attack, basically. But this time, we started in that direction. And President Obama started in that direction. And quite obviously, not willingly. This isn't the course of action he wanted to take. But again, the way our mindset, our collective mindset has worked over the years, it seemed to him, and the information he was getting from his advisors, it seemed to him that, again, we were going to go in this direction because our collective wisdom over the years has said that somehow the only way to stop attack is with attack. But all of a sudden, and there's always been these voices in the discussion, but all of a sudden, those voices of dissent got quite a bit louder. The voices that said, do you see the silliness of this? Do you see the silliness of bombing someone to stop them killing? Do you see the silliness of stopping attack, and how that doesn't ever really happen? And this sentiment, in one way or another, was coming out of voices that one wouldn't expect it to come out of. Right-wing Republicans, who, as some of the political commentators have said jokingly, never met a war they didn't like. Suddenly, this sentiment is coming out of their mouths. Democrats who have been very supportive of this president in a lot of things, openly criticizing their own, who they see as their own guy in the White House, for wanting to make an attack, wanting to use an attack approach. And the dialogue has never been on that side of the issue, in my memory, has never been this loud or this effective. The idea of peace, that you can't get peace through attack. Wow. Suddenly that's getting ground. That's that's gaining ground. All of a sudden, that's not a wimpy position anymore. That's truth. It's very inspiring. So what began to happen, and largely this is due to the kind of human being we have in the office of the presidency right now. First, the president said, listen, this is something that has to be actioned on, and we have to decide what to do. Now, he said his military commanders had informed him, that they could do a military strike with very little damage, boots on the ground, and that could effectively deteriorate or take away the use of these chemical weapons. And while the president said that they were ready and prepared to do that, he said he wanted the voice of the people to be heard, and so he was going to take it to Congress for approval. That in itself was remarkable, since that has rarely happened in the history of our military actions, increasingly. So much was made of that. And there were skeptics that said, well, he just doesn't want to do it, so he's trying to get out of it by turning it over to Congress. It seemed to me, and this is just my reaction on it, you can take it just the way you would take any other pundit's take on it, but it seemed to me that the president was trying to actually follow the Constitution, which says that you're supposed to go to Congress before you go and blow somebody away. But, okay, I don't want to get into that. I don't have a lot of time. What I'm trying to say is that shift in and of itself was remarkable. And then, out of nowhere, as the Secretary of State Kerry was giving a press conference, out of his mouth came the peaceful option. Came the idea that had been floated, and apparently this had been floated in the back room, but because of our mindset, wasn't listened to. But when it came out, it began to gain ground. The idea that Syria would turn its chemical weapons over to the international community with the help of Russia, and that they would be in control of it and they would destroy them as a way to avoid military action. And Secretary of State Kerry's thought about that at the time, as he was saying, was that it will never happen. They'll never do it. Well, lo and behold, the Russians went to Syria and said, listen, we should do this. And the Syrians agreed. So Russia, which many have sort of condemned for standing up for the Syrians and saying the UN, as part of their involvement with the UN, that they would not agree to having Syria attacked, and thereby standing in the way of our military fix, if you will. Now they step forward to present the alternative, the peaceful alternative. So remarkably, and this has all happened in the space of a week and a half, and now we have a real agreement as of today. The Secretary of State Kerry and Lavrov of Russia found common ground and have given birth to a detailed plan to rid Syria of its chemical weapons. And you can read the details anywhere. I'll go over just a bit of it. Basically, Syria has a week to hand over a detailed list of all of those weapons. The entire chemical weapons capability will be destroyed by the middle of next year. And basically, if there isn't compliance from Syria, then the UN Security Council can impose measures, which could mean the use of force. Now, President Obama is still making it very clear that he may use unilateral force if need be. But as he has said, and this is again a remarkable thing, this is a president who has chosen peace over attack. This is a president who has begun an understanding that attack does not end attack. So, this is a remarkable thing. And with situations like this, I turn to A Course in Miracles, which has been a real strong guide for me in dealing with issues of conflict. When you're faced with a conflict, when someone is attacking out of a sense of illusion, the idea that their attacking is going to help them, what they're failing to understand is what they're attacking is themselves, and that they're hurting themselves. And that out of compassion, you need to stop someone who is attacking. But you need to stop the attack without attacking that person. Because if you're attacking, then again, you are living in illusion. You are attacking yourself and hurting yourself, or trying to hurt yourself. So, you need to stop attack. And the best way to stop attack is to reveal the truth. And by revealing the truth, it's understood by the attacker who and what they really are, and the illusion of what they're doing. So what we've effectively done in this situation, out of absolutely no one's prompting, peace has emerged. A peaceful way of stopping the attack, or stopping potential attacks, has emerged. And as I said, this is a remarkable shift in how we deal with not only the Middle East, but with all kinds of conflicts. And it speaks to me a lot about the shift as humans that I firmly believe is going on. Now, would another president have dealt with it differently? It's possible. It's quite possible. But I think we're living in a time when our understanding of peace and what that really means is reaching what some call a critical mass, and a critical mass in a good way. In other words, there's starting to become real revelation about what that all means. So, it's an amazing thing to talk about, and while I have spent most of this episode talking about it. But I do want to get to this neurocinema, as they are calling it. This idea of using neurology as a marketing tool. Now, this is also being used, by the way, or being attempted to be used in just basic marketing and sales strategies. The idea is that you walk into a mall, and basically there are scanners that would be able to read your reactions to things and build ad approaches based on your reaction to things. But I want to just talk about how it's being used in film, and just to qualify this, a lot of Hollywood producers and studios that are probably using this a lot more than they're talking about don't want to say anything about it. And the reason why is they're afraid of the blowback that might occur, but we can talk about that later. Basically, this is a method of using neurofeedback, and we've talked about how we use neurofeedback to help us reduce stress and all of those kinds of things. Well, this is another use of it. Using this neurofeedback information to help movie makers refine elements of the script, characters, plot, scenes, effects. It's been used mostly in movie trailers to see what kind of reaction certain visual images evoke. The whole idea is that you want to induce a high level of activity in the area of the brain known as the amygdala. And that would then sort of incentivize someone to go and see this particular movie. So neurocinematics, as professor at Princeton by the name of Yuri Hassan has coined the term, he concluded that certain types of films, such as horror films, science fiction films, and so forth, produce high activation scores in amygdala region of the viewer subject's brains. And that's the part that controls disgust, anger, lust, and fear, your base emotions, what some people call the reptilian brain. And Hassan asserts that horror films can potentially control audiences' brains by horror filmmakers can potentially control audiences' brains by precisely editing films to maximize amygdalic excitement and control for buzz and success at the theater. And we're going to talk more about this in the next show, but as a fan of horror films and sci-fi films, I can definitely attest to, and if you've ever seen them, that a really good one does give you that feeling of a rush that can be addictive. I really do believe it can be that rush feeling is addictive, and I think that is a driving force behind why big budget special effects movies these days are the ones that audiences are going to see, or at least the ones that in which most of the attention from movie studios is being given. I think people sort of crave that experience, that sense of rush. Not unlike, the feeling of a drug, as I say. I could liken it to that, in that, it can give you a buzzy feeling, and that can last, for a while after you leave the theater, too. So it's very interesting, this whole area, and there's a lot of talk about how it's being used, and we'll get into how it was used with in conjunction with the director James Cameron's movie Avatar, which you may have heard about. It was a very successful movie, and he used this approach quite a bit. So we'll talk more about that next time. My goodness, this has gone by so fast. So do have a wonderful week.